Welcome to my video. This is an addendum to the first impressions video I did on the reMarkable Paper Pro, which is what we have here on the left. And in that video, I did some segments on looking at a color palette to see how well colors were reproduced on this device using the Gallery 3 screen technology. And astute viewers did make some comments about wondering if the contrast filter was on or not, and it was on. Actually, it was set to automatic by default, and it turns out that has an impact on how the colors are generated. So we're going to redo those comparisons with the auto contrast filter off to see what that looks like. Now, before we do that, I want to do a couple of demonstrations to kind of illustrate the purpose of the contrast filter. And we're going to start off with this pretty basic text document you can see here. And you'll notice that the contrast filter is selected on. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that off. And I want you to notice the text get lighter as a result. Okay, do you see how it's much lighter now? Let's go ahead and switch it back to the on position. And it's much darker. Again, off, it's lighter, and on, it's much darker. And I think this is the fundamental purpose of the contrast filter, is to take PDFs, or I suppose EPUBs as well, that normally would come out fairly light. That's a common problem with PDFs. And to darken them so they're easier to read. However, as it interacts with color, it does kind of interfere with the reproduction. And let's take a look at that before we get to the color palette. Okay, to further illustrate this in action, I thought it would be useful to take a look at this document. This is building Lego instructions that were created by Simon84. This is a fantastic set. I highly recommend it for anyone that's into the modular buildings. Just look up LionPub or Simon84 and you should be able to find it. You can buy the instructions from him. That's what I did, and I also have the set in my study, so it's really fantastic. But these instructions illustrate quite well the issue with using the contrast filter on color media. So let me go ahead and swipe the page here, and we'll just do it one more time. Okay, perfect. So what you see here is a pretty good image, right? You can see the panel, you can see the pieces that are applied in this step. But what happens then if we go ahead and turn on the contrast filter here? Okay, and that's what happens. It gets much darker, it's much harder to discern the detail. I can't see the studs at all, or I can just barely see faint images of them on the plate, where without the contrast filter, it was perfectly visible. Let's go ahead and return to that. And there you go. So the contrast filter appears to work really well for black and white situations, but was probably something you want to turn off in dealing with color documents. And again, this impacted the palette. So let's go ahead and take a look at the palette now with this contrast filter off. Okay, so now we've returned to the color palette. I'm going to share once again the paper version of it. But as I do this, I just want you to pay attention to one particular thing. As I lay the piece of paper down here, you'll notice that the screen here will get darker. The screen itself is not changing. I think it's just how the camera is handling the reflection of the light from the paper. So let's take a look at that. So keep your eye on this as I put down the piece of paper. Okay, and then I'm going to remove the piece of paper, and you can see it gets a little bit brighter. So just know that that's just a trick of the camera. But let's focus particularly on the colors. And again, let's validate that we have contrast filter off. Yes, it's off there. Actually, let's turn it back on real quickly to see as a reminder of what was happening. Okay, great. So what was happening is that the first three columns were basically showing no change in the gradient, right? They pretty much, this column pretty much looks the same as this column. It isn't until this column that things really start to fade, and then they almost completely disappear in the final column, yellow appearing one column earlier than the rest of the colors. So that's what we saw when we had contrast filter on, and that's different than the image. This image definitely has different shading as you go across. Not a tremendous amount of difference between the first and second columns, but there is a subtle little bit of difference, and you can certainly see it by the third column and so on. So if we go back here and we turn off the contrast filter, like so, a much more accurate portrayal of the gradation. You can't tell the difference between the first two columns, where here it is a little subtle, but you can kind of see the difference. So that still holds true. But by the third column, you definitely see that gradation take hold. Certainly by the fourth column, and then the fifth column remains fairly blank. So turning contrast filter on definitely improves the accuracy of the colors. The colors themselves, I think, are pretty much the same if we focus on the 100% level. I think the colors are fairly accurately represented as they were with the contrast filter on, but of course they're muted, and again, same with the contrast filter. So it's really in the more, on these right columns that you can see the difference by taking that contrast filter off. Okay, given that, let's go ahead and take a look at how the Gallery 3 then compares to Kaleido 3, again with the contrast filter on the off position. Okay, so here we have the Gallery 3 screen on the reMarkable Paper Pro, and here we have the Kaleido 3 screen on the Books Note Air 3C. I am further away from the light source with the Books Note Air, and it has the darker screen because of the color layer. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on front lighting just so we can see this better. And let me actually see if I can make them fairly comparable. That's roughly the same. Go ahead and refresh. Okay, now we can do another comparison. And we can see that there are still some advantages to the Kaleido 3. I mean, you see a little bit of the shading in the final column where you can just see a couple shadows, at least I can. I'm not sure that the camera will pick it up, but it is much better over here. You do see, again, more gradation across the spectrum on the Kaleido 3, and again here, not a lot between the first and second columns, but also, as we saw before, the color accuracy is of course much better on the Gallery 3 screen than what we're seeing over here on the Kaleido 3 screen. So in a way, this comparison hasn't changed particularly dramatically, other than Gallery 3 shows up a little bit better in some of the latter gradation. Okay, one final look before we wrap this up. I also got a request to take the Bigme Galley, which is the original Gallery 3 device. These two devices are the only devices, as of this filming, that was released with the Gallery 3 technology, and put the same template onto the Galley, and that's what we have here. And part of the reason why this was requested is there was a strange transition from the original iteration of Gallery to our current iteration, and that's that the original one was supposed to be able to reproduce 50,000 colors, and the current version is supposed to be able to reduce 20,000. So the question was, can you see the difference in that higher selection of colors on the original screen versus the one we have on the reMarkable Paper Pro? And I actually can see some differences. I think the gradation, again, you can start to see it at the 80% where you can't see it here. You can see a little more shadows here, not on yellow, but you can see them on the other colors. It's very faint. And then the colors are a little more striking to me on this column. But what really sticks out between these two, to me, is the blue. So the blue, here, this is cyan here, and above it is cyan and magenta, which is supposed to reproduce as blue. Let me get the original piece of paper, just as a reminder. See, this is blue here, right? It's a slightly darker blue, but it's definitely blue. Now, what we see with The reMarkable is it's very dark. It's almost blackish here, and it kind of is a little more grayscale. But that's not the case with the original Gallery 3. This is definitely a pretty accurate reproduction of the blue we saw on the piece of paper. And you can see that right balance between blue and cyan. Again, let me get the piece of paper as an illustration. You can see that there, that relationship between those two colors is replicated here. It is not replicated here. Having said that, magentas look pretty good, very similar. This red on the Galley is a little more orange to me, where I think it's a little more of a truer red over here on the reMarkable. Blacks look fine, no difference there. Cyan, pretty good on both. Again, you see more gradation on this one. I think win as well on the greens here for the reMarkable. You can see these greens are a little more pale, where this is much more of a darker, more truer green. Yellows look pretty similar, and then finally kind of the reproduction again of black and charcoal is pretty similar as well. So you do see some of the impact of having additional colors available on the original Gallery 3, but we also see that the new version of Gallery 3 is a little more faithful in its color reproduction. Okay, that should do it. I think that covers everything. And now the next video will be a visual tour. So until then, I will see you next time.